It was the week before Thanksgiving when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I was elbow deep in pie crust dough, flour on my forearms, the whole apartment smelling like butter and brown sugar. I'd been planning for weeks. Bought a 20-pound turkey. Ordered the good cranberry sauce from that little farm stand outside Asheville. Found my grandmother's sweet potato casserole recipe folded inside an old cookbook. I was excited. Genuinely, embarrassingly excited. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked up my phone. It was a text from my mother. "Sweetie, I need to let you know, this here Thanksgiving is going to be smaller. Just us, your brother, and Melissa's family. Her parents are flying in from Phoenix and the house is going to be pretty full. Hope you understand. We'll do something with you another time." I read it twice. Then I set the phone face down on the counter and stood there for a moment with my hands pressed flat against the cold granite. My brother Marcus. And Melissa. And Melissa's parents flying in from Phoenix. There was plenty of room in that house. I grew up in it. I knew every square foot, the big dining room table that seats 12, the 2 guest rooms, the pull-out sofa in the basement. My parents had hosted 30 people for my uncle's retirement party 2 summers ago without blinking. There was room. There just wasn't room for me. I'm 31 years old. I've been living in Asheville, North Carolina for 4 years, about 2 hours from my parents' house in Charlotte, close enough to drive home for holidays. Far enough that I built a life that was entirely my own. Growing up, Marcus was always the son that everything orbited around. He was 3 years older than me, easygoing and charming in that effortless way that made adults adore him. He got good grades without trying too hard. He had a wide circle of friends. He married Melissa at 28, bought a house at 30, and my parents spoke about those milestones the way people talk about miracles. I was quieter. More complicated, I think, in ways they didn't know how to hold. I changed my major twice. I moved cities before I found where I belonged. I dated someone for 2 years who turned out to be completely wrong for me, and the breakup was messy in ways I'm not proud of. I made choices that were mine to make, but my parents had a way of logging each one like evidence. Evidence that I was the harder one, the one who required more patience, the one who could be shuffled to the side when things got crowded. It was never said out loud. That's the thing about families like mine. It's never said out loud. When Marcus got engaged, my mother called me to talk about the wedding for 45 minutes and mentioned my life exactly once to ask if I was still doing that pottery thing. I was, at the time, running my own small interior design studio. I had been for 2 years. I had mentioned it probably a dozen times. She just didn't retain it the way she retained every detail of Marcus's life. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself a lot of things for a long time. I moved to Asheville because a friend told me I'd love it, and she was right. The city has this particular energy. Creative and a little rough around the edges. The kind of place where you can open a small business and people will actually show up for you. I found a studio space in the River Arts District, started taking on residential clients, and slowly, steadily built something I was proud of. The business wasn't glamorous in the beginning. I had one client my first year, a woman named Ruth who wanted her living room redone and paid me in installments. I drove a car that made a concerning noise every time I accelerated. I ate a lot of rice and beans and told myself it was temporary. It was. By my 3rd year, I had a small team, just 2 other people, but still, and a waiting list. I started getting referrals from architects and contractors. I landed a project redesigning the lobby and common spaces of a boutique hotel in downtown Asheville. And when that hotel was featured in a regional travel magazine, my phone didn't stop for 2 weeks. That project changed everything. Suddenly, I was getting inquiries from clients in Charlotte, in Raleigh, and Nashville, the kind of clients who have second homes and renovation budgets that make your eyes water. And then I got the call that changed my life in a different way entirely. A developer in western North Carolina had purchased a historic property, a 1920s estate on 11 acres outside of Waynesville, about 40 minutes from Asheville. Stone exterior, original hardwood floors, 8 bedrooms, a carriage house, mountain views from every north-facing window. It had been sitting empty for years, deteriorating, and the developer wanted to restore it and list it as a luxury rental property. He needed a designer who understood both historic preservation and modern comfort. He found me through the hotel project. We met, we talked, and he offered me the contract. I spent 18 months on that property. I sourced antique fixtures and had them restored. I found local craftspeople to rebuild what couldn't be saved. I argued with contractors about original millwork and won. I put everything I had into that house. When it was finished, I walked through it alone on a Thursday afternoon in early October. The light was coming through the restored windows in long golden strips across the old pine floors. There were wildflowers in a vase on the kitchen island that I'd picked myself from the property that morning. I stood in the entryway and I cried. Not because it was over. Because for the first time in my life, I could look at something and say, I did that. I made that exist. The developer was thrilled. He offered me a percentage of the rental revenue for the first 2 years as a bonus, which was generous beyond what I'd expected. And then, almost as an aside at the end of our final walkthrough, he mentioned that the property was also going to be listed for sale and that his investors had appraised it at just over $4 million. $4 million? A property I had spent 18 months pouring myself into. I asked him, half joking, if he'd sell it to me. He wasn't joking when he answered. We worked out terms over the following 3 weeks. I used every dollar of savings I had, took on a mortgage I would be paying for decades, and called in a favor from a business investor I'd worked with on a previous project. It was the most terrifying financial decision I have ever made. I signed the papers on a Friday in late September. The keys were in my hand by noon. I sat on the front steps of my $4 million stone estate in the mountains of North Carolina and ate a gas station sandwich and laughed until I cried. Nobody in my family knew. I had stopped sharing big things with them a long time ago. Not out of spite, out of self-protection. Every time I shared something that mattered to me, I braced for the moment my mother would redirect the conversation to Marcus. Or my father would find a practical concern to focus on instead of just saying, I'm proud of you. So I kept the things that mattered most close to my chest, where they were safe. The estate was mine. I was the only one who knew. Then came that text. I stood in my kitchen in Nashville and read my mother's words again. We'll do something with you another time. Like I was an appointment that could be rescheduled. Like Thanksgiving with your family was something you could simply postpone, the way you postpone a dentist cleaning. I thought about calling her. I thought about what I would say. Whether I would be calm, or whether I would finally, after 31 years, say the thing that had been sitting in the back of my throat for most of my adult life. Instead, I typed back, okay, no worries. And then I sat down at my kitchen table, and I thought. I thought about my Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, who had driven 6 hours from Tennessee every Thanksgiving for 20 years until my parents stopped inviting her because she and my mother had a falling out over something so small, I can barely remember what it was. Carol, who used to sneak me an extra slice of pecan pie and call me her sharp one. I thought about my cousin Jade, Carol's youngest daughter, who I'd grown close to over the years. We texted almost every day, and who told me last spring that she and her husband Tyler had been planning to skip Thanksgiving entirely this year because the whole family dynamic had gotten too heavy. I thought about my dad's brother, Uncle Ray, who lived in Knoxville and who I adored. He was funny and warm and always asked real questions. Not polite questions, real ones. The kind that meant he actually wanted to know the answer. He'd been quietly edged out of the family gatherings over the years too, for reasons that were never made entirely clear. I thought about my friend Priya, who was spending Thanksgiving alone because her family was overseas, and my neighbor Gwen, recently divorced, who had mentioned that the holidays were hard now. I put down my phone. And then I picked it back up. I called Jade first. Tell me you don't have plans for Thanksgiving, I said. I absolutely do not have plans for Thanksgiving, she said. Tyler and I were literally just talking about ordering pizza and watching movies. Why? Because I just bought a $4 million estate in the mountains, I said. And I want to have the best Thanksgiving anyone has ever had. Are you in? There was a pause. Say that again, she said. I said it again. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The next 2 weeks were a blur of the best kind. I called Uncle Ray, who said absolutely wouldn't miss it before I even finished describing the property. I called Carol and she went quiet for a moment before saying very softly, "Sweetheart, I would love that more than you know." I called Priya and Gwen. I called 2 more old friends from my college years who I knew had complicated family situations and no solid plans. I called a catering company I'd worked with on events before and I put in an order for a full Thanksgiving spread plus backup dishes because I know how these things go. 11 people said yes. 11 people who, for one reason or another, had nowhere they truly belonged that Thursday. I drove out to the estate the Tuesday before Thanksgiving to set up. I opened all the windows in the main hall to let the mountain air in. I arranged tables in the great room so everyone could sit together. I found candles in a box I'd left there from the staging process and set them on the long oak table. I cut the last of the late-season wildflowers from the property and put them in mason jars. Wednesday morning, people started arriving. Carol came with Jade and Tyler. They pulled up the long gravel drive and Carol stepped out of the car and stopped walking. She just stood there, looking up at the stone facade, the mountain ridgeline behind it, the sky turning pink at the edges. "Maggie," she said. "That's my name, Maggie. What did you do?" "I just fixed up an old house," I said. She hugged me so hard my ribs hurt. Uncle Ray arrived with a bottle of good bourbon and spent the first hour walking every room, asking questions about the restoration with genuine, detailed curiosity. He kept stopping to run his hand along the original molding or crouch down to look at the repaired hardwood. "This is the real thing," he kept saying. "This is the real thing." Priya brought homemade dal and rice, which we added to the spread without a second thought. Gwen brought her famous pecan bars and a 6-year-old daughter who immediately claimed the carriage house as her personal castle. Wednesday night we stayed up too late around the fireplace, talking about nothing and everything. Uncle Ray and Tyler got into a friendly argument about college football. Carol told stories about my mother and her as kids that made me laugh and ache at the same time. Jade fell asleep on the couch at 10 and nobody woke her. I sat in an armchair by the fire and watched the room. All these people I loved or was beginning to love settled into my home like they belonged there, and something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized was tight. Thanksgiving morning I woke up early and made coffee and sat on the front steps in the cold with a blanket around my shoulders. The mountains were doing that thing they do in November where the mist sits low in the valleys and the ridges rise above it in dark, sharp lines. An old dog from somewhere nearby wandered up the drive, sniffed my hand, and sat down next to me like we were old friends. I named him Duke on the spot. He stayed for 3 days. The catering team arrived at 10. By noon, the house smelled like roasting turkey and herbs and butter and something warm and sweet from the dessert table. There was music, nothing too loud, just something soft playing from the kitchen. And there were voices everywhere, overlapping and comfortable. We ate at 2 in the afternoon. At some point during the meal, Carol raised her glass and said simply, "To Maggie, who made this." And everyone raised their glasses, including Gwen's 6-year-old, who raised a cup of apple cider with tremendous seriousness. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just smiled and nodded and looked down at my plate until I was sure my face was under control. My phone buzzed at 4:37 in the afternoon. It was my mother. I almost didn't answer. But some old instinct, some deep-rooted habit of being a good daughter, made me pick up. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice had that careful, pleasant tone that I recognized as the one she used when she wanted something. "How's your day going?" "It's good," I said. I'd stepped out onto the back porch, away from the noise. "Really good, actually. That's great, that's great, that's great." I saw that Jade posted some photos on Instagram. There it was. I had not posted anything, but Jade had. The great room full of people, the table set with candles, the mountain view through the tall windows, and Carol had posted one of me and her together by the fireplace, the stone walls behind us, the old chandelier overhead. "She must have had a good time," I said carefully. "Maggie." My mother's voice shifted. Is that whose house is that? In the photos? I took a breath of cold mountain air. Mine. Silence. What do you mean yours? I mean I bought it? About 6 weeks ago. It's in the mountains outside Waynesville. I did the design restoration on it earlier this year and then had the opportunity to purchase it. You. She stopped. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about all the times I'd tried to share things and felt them land nowhere. I thought about the text I'd received 2 weeks ago. We'll do something with you another time. I don't know, Mom, I said. I guess I just wasn't sure you'd want to know. Another silence, longer this time. I heard voices in the background. My brother's voice, the clink of dishes. Your father and I didn't know you were struggling with feeling left out, she said. If we'd known, we would have. I'm not struggling, I said. And I meant it, standing on that porch, looking at the mountains, the sound of laughter drifting out through the door behind me. I genuinely wasn't. I had a really wonderful Thanksgiving, actually. Carol and Uncle Ray came. Jade and Tyler, some friends. 11 people total. Another pause. 11 people, she repeated. 11 people, I said. It was the best Thanksgiving I've ever had. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, Well, it sounds like you made other arrangements. I did, I said. I did exactly that. We said goodnight and I hung up. I stood on the porch for a few more minutes in the cold. Somewhere inside, Uncle Ray had started telling a story that was making everyone laugh. I could tell by the way the laughter came in waves. Gwen's daughter was running through the main hall in her socks. My phone buzzed again. Then again. My father, this time. I let it go to voicemail. Then, my brother. I let that go too. I turned my phone face down on the porch railing and watched the last of the light fade from the ridgeline. In the days that followed, there were phone calls I didn't answer and text messages that ranged from confused to accusatory to something that almost resembled an apology but stopped just short of being one. My mother said she felt blindsided. My father said he thought I was being dramatic. My brother sent a long text that started with, I'm not taking sides, and then proceeded to very clearly take a side. I read each one. I sat with each one. I did not respond in anger because anger wasn't what I felt. What I felt was something quieter and more final. The particular clarity that comes when you realize you've been waiting a long time for something that was never going to arrive. I had been waiting for my parents to see me. Not the version of me that was easy to manage or easy to slot into a narrative, but the actual me. The one who built a business from nothing, who stayed up too late solving problems, who drove 2 hours round trip to source the right antique door hardware for a restoration because the wrong hardware would haunt her. The one who was funny in the right company and guarded in the wrong company and deeply, stubbornly committed to the things she cared about. I had been waiting for them to see her and to say, "We see you. We're proud." Thanksgiving on that porch, watching the mountain go dark, I finally understood that the waiting was over. Not because I was giving up, but because I didn't need it the way I once had. Carol had seen it. Uncle Ray had seen it. Jade, who texted me the Monday after to say it was the best weekend of her entire year, had seen it. I had a house on 11 acres that I had restored with my own hands and my own vision. I had a table that could seat 20 people. I had a front porch with a mountain view. I had Duke, who came back the following weekend and who I eventually, sheepishly, adopted. I had more than enough. 6 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, my mother called and asked if we could start fresh. I told her I was open to that. I told her that what starting fresh would require was not just a phone call but an actual, sustained effort to show up differently, to ask questions and mean them, to make space, to stop treating my life like a footnote to my brother's story. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I didn't know you felt that way." "I know," I said. "That's part of the problem." We talked for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. I want to be honest about that. One conversation doesn't undo 30 years of patterns. But it was a beginning. A real one, not a polite one. When I hung up, I was sitting on the floor of the great room with Duke's head in my lap and candles burning on the mantel and the lights on the Christmas tree I put up by the window reflecting in the glass. I thought about the woman who had stood in this entryway 18 months ago, crying, looking at the light on the pine floors, thinking I made this. I thought about how much had changed and how much was still mine to figure out. I thought about Carol's face when she stepped out of the car and stopped walking. "What did you do?" "I just fixed up an old house," I had said. But that wasn't quite true, was it? I had built something. Not just the house. Though the house was real and the floors were real and the stone walls were real. I had built a life that could hold people. A table long enough for the ones who showed up. A door that opened. I had been the girl on the margin, the one quietly holding a gift no one thought to ask about. I wasn't that anymore. And the door, the one I had spent 18 months restoring, sourcing the original hardware for, getting exactly right, that door was mine to open now. I opened it. I used to think the hardest part was being overlooked. It isn't. The hardest part is the moment you realize you've been quietly adjusting yourself. Shrinking, editing, pre-apologizing, to make it easier for people who never once returned the effort. That realization doesn't come loudly. It comes on a Tuesday afternoon when you're reading a text message in a flour-dusted kitchen, and something in you just goes still. My mother didn't exclude me from Thanksgiving because she was cruel. I want to be honest about that. She did it because I had become, over the years, the easy one to move. The one who would say okay and mean it, or at least seem to. The one who had quietly trained everyone around her to expect very little resistance, and that pattern was something I had allowed. Not consciously, not happily, but I had allowed it all the same. When we keep showing up for people who consistently make us smaller, we are teaching them that the cost of that behavior is zero. I had been teaching my family that lesson for 31 years. What changed wasn't the estate. I want to be clear about that too, because I think it would be easy to walk away from this story thinking the point is the $4 million, or the stone walls, or the mountain view. It isn't. What changed was that I stopped waiting. I stopped waiting for my parents to decide I was worth including. I stopped waiting for the phone call where my mother would finally ask a real question about my life and actually listen to the answer. I stopped waiting to be chosen, and I chose instead. I chose Carol, and Ray, and Jade, and Priya, and Gwen, and 11 people who showed up because they wanted to, not because obligation required it. That choice had consequences I didn't plan for. My parents felt the ground shift and they didn't like it. My brother sent a long text that was really just a mirror of his own discomfort. That's the thing about people who are used to holding a kind of invisible power over you. They don't recognize it as power until you stop handing it to them. And when you stop, they call it dramatic. They call it being difficult. They call it, if they're feeling generous, a misunderstanding. It isn't a misunderstanding. It's cause and effect. For every year I swallowed something that hurt and smiled anyway, the dynamic calcified a little more. For every time I made myself smaller to keep the peace, I was quietly confirming that the peace was more important than I was. And for every time I finally chose differently, chose to build, to invite, to open the door on my own terms, something shifted, not magically, not all at once, but shifted. The Thanksgiving table I set that year wasn't revenge. I need to say that plainly. It was just mine. That's all it was. A table I set with my own hands, in a house I'd poured myself into, for people who wanted to be there. The fact that it happened to be extraordinary was almost beside the point. Carol would have come to a studio apartment. Ray would have sat on a folding chair. The point was never the estate. The point was the door. That I built one. That I learned how to open it. That I stopped standing on the other side of someone else's, waiting to be let in. I'm still figuring out what my family looks like going forward. My mother and I are trying. Some days that feels like enough, and some days it doesn't. But I know this, I am not the girl quietly holding a gift no one thought to ask about anymore. I haven't been for a while. I just needed a November in the mountains to finally see it clearly.